For those of you all just joining us tonight, welcome to another episode of Never Again podcast series with Meir, Halevi, Weinstein. It will begin momentarily. Tonight we'll be continuing our coverage of the crisis in Ukraine from an international, global, as well as particularly from a Jewish and Israeli perspective. We do have a previously recorded conversation with David Schoen. He was unable to make it this evening, but a couple of hours ago we had the opportunity to chat with him. We'll air that interview this evening, along with some other guests. Well, Leon Kushner joining us again. You can find him on his blog or read him on some newspapers, but apparently he's been recently blocked from one of them. He can talk more about that in a little bit. But do go to his personal blog, The World is Upside Down. And his artwork can be found on his website as well. We'll also have Bellerose with us, a proud self-proclaimed Zionist who's from an indigenous Metis from Alberta. He's also a member of Canada United with Israel and a founding member of Calgary United with Israel. Once again, the special edition continues, our third episode dedicated completely to the crisis in Ukraine, where new developments appear to be occurring hourly. It's hard to keep up. We look forward to our guests' commentary on this terrible situation. The world is a dangerous place, as Weinstein said, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. Without any further ado, we'll have Meir momentarily discuss the parsha of the week. Well, Meir, thanks for joining us on your show. Sorry for a little bit of a sloppy intro there, but we got it together. I'll see you a little later. And here's
Perfect.
Meir.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to ask everyone if you could please share this show, the link on your various platforms that you have on social media, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We'd really appreciate it. We'll reach a lot more people. We always start with some words from the Parsha and connect it to what's going on. And we're living in incredible times right now, historic times. The Parsha that we just read in all synagogues throughout the world is Parshas Pekudei. It is the last Parsha in the book of Shemos, Exodus, and the last. And to recap, it's really about finishing the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle in the wilderness. And the last part of the Parsha goes on that the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. Moses was unable to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud rested on it, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. When the cloud rose up from over the tabernacle, the Jewish people would set out in all their travels. So it's dependent on God's clouds of glory setting the direction where the Jewish people would move in the wilderness as they eventually made it to Israel. So if the cloud did not rise, they would not set out until the day that it rose. For the cloud of God was upon the tabernacle by day, and there was a fire in it by night, before the eyes of the entire Jewish people in all of their travels. Like I said, we're living in unbelievable historic times. With the rise of the state of Israel in 1948, now Jews are thinking collectively worldwide with what is going on in the Ukraine, the bombardment and the dire straits that the Jewish community is in. And they estimate that there may be 300,000 Jews, give or take, living in the Ukraine. Could you imagine if there was a state of Israel during the Holocaust that the IDF would bomb the rail lines leading to Auschwitz, where every single day 12,000 Jews were murdered? Or when there were auxiliary forces and collaborators in the Ukraine, what would the IDF do if they tried to murder Jews back then? And what would there be a Babi Yar that we talk about even right now? What's going on right now is a rescue mission. As God protected the Jewish people in the wilderness and led them by the way, with the clouds of glory by day and with the fire at night, what we have right now is the IDF and the Israeli planes that are rescuing Jews from the Ukraine. Israeli planes traveling through the clouds by day and the fiery engine by night, rescuing the Jewish people. It's unbelievable the times that we're living in right now that we see this. And on the world stage, little tiny Israel, little tiny insignificant Israel, that represents 0.06 of the size of the Middle East, that they were called upon by the nations of the world to try to mediate a deal with Russia, to mediate a deal in this conflict between Russia and the Ukraine. That the Prime Minister of Israel actually traveled, and he's religious, he keeps Shabbat. He actually broke the Shabbat in order to save the world, to negotiate, to try to work out a deal with Vladimir Putin from Russia. Unbelievable. That's what's going on. The world is looking up to Israel if they could solve this problem. What a historic time. We have various guests. We're going to be talking about the situation, how it affects Israel, how it affects the Jewish people, what our position should be. There's a lot of thinking in our community. They don't know where they should go. They don't know what they should do. They're actually becoming apologists for the involvement that the Ukraine had during the Holocaust. That there may have been some individuals. There are, at some of these rallies going on, banners praising Stefan Bandera, who was a Nazi collaborator from the Ukraine during the Holocaust. His portrait is being shown, there's banners for him, and some Jews are marching with these people. It's outrageous. I'm not becoming any kind of apologist for Putin or anything like that, but I'm certainly not going to turn a blind eye to Nazi collaborators from the Ukrainian community. We have a lot to discuss today. We have some video to show as well. Let me bring on our guest. We have Ryan Bellerose, who's joining us. We have Leon Kushner, who's joining us. Ezra Ridley from Israel. He was very active here in Toronto with the Toronto Zionist Council, and he moved to Israel and is extremely active with the Jews living in Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem. And he could fill us in also what the mood is in Israel with this crisis in the Ukraine, and how Jews, Israel are absorbing Jewish refugees fleeing from the Ukraine. So we're going to get into a great discussion, but let me just start with Leon. Leon wrote on his blog some very interesting points that we should know about the Ukraine. Modern history, past history, up to date, what's going on. So let's discuss that, and we'll get into it. And also, we're going to show a clip of an interview that was done earlier today with David Schoen, who was a lawyer representing former President Donald Trump. And he's very involved right now, chairman with the Zionist Organization of America. But Leon, you wrote a blog. You created a little bit of waves with the information that you were providing. Fill us in. What can you say?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to meet all you fine gents out there. Some I've known, like Ryan, but I'm happy to meet Ezra. Yeah, look, you're absolutely right. These are historic times, and we should all be very, very proud of ourselves, the Jews, and our Jewish homeland, to play this kind of a role, to mediate this. This could potentially, I'm not saying this lightly. This could potentially, God forbid, spark a world war. And it's obviously the last thing anyone wants. Sorry, I take that back. I don't know about everyone, but most sane people in the world don't want it. Even people that oppose what I have to say don't want it. So this is incredible. I mean, really incredible. But like you alluded to earlier on, I went against the mainstream narrative, and the mainstream narrative was something like this. I'll boil it down quickly. Putin, bad, evil thug who's invading a beautiful, democratic country next door where everything's just honky-dory, and they have a fantastic Jewish president, a Jewish prime minister. It's the best place on earth, especially for Jews. Hello, the Jews, run it. It's fantastic. Never mind their Nazi past, but today they're already fantastic. They're great. And hail Zelensky is a hero. I saw it a little differently. I explained so in my blog. I think I was one of the first people to do so, by the way, on the planet, believe it or not. I mean, I've seen it since I wrote my blog. I see other people coming around. Thank God. But all I'm saying is don't think for yourselves. People who watch this show and listen to us should know. No, think for yourselves. If there's a mainstream narrative going on, whatever it is, don't rush to buy it. There are nefarious people that would have us, they have a narrative, they push it down our throats 24/7. I don't care if it's about COVID, it's about Israel being apartheid. I mean, for a million years, it doesn't stop. So we should know better. I understand that other people don't get it, but Jews of all people should know better. So as you know, I created a stir. I quoted my dear late Holocaust surviving mother, who said about Ukraine, Lozenbrennen, which we know what it means. And I'm not saying that, God forbid, I want Ukrainians today, the whole country to burn. But what I am saying is, calm down, everyone. Take a deep breath. Uh, it's not really our business other than to save our fellow Jews in Ukraine. And we're going to talk about that soon. That's what we should be focusing on, saving lives. And yes, if we could stop the war and stop people, innocent civilians, from killing each other, great. We are the light onto the world. So absolutely, that's part of our job too, if we can. But I guess we're going to get into that in a minute. But I'll tell you this. Maybe tell me if I'm jumping ahead too far. I don't want like what's going to happen. And the hero Zelensky and others in Ukraine and other NATO countries, the Baltic states like Poland and whatnot, Lithuania and the other Schlachtraffies, they're going to ask. They're probably going to negotiate. They're probably doing it right now. If you want to save the Jews, then you got to give us military weapons. That's being said right now. I guarantee you, behind closed doors, just like in World War II. Same thing. You remember the Nazi deal early on? You want to, or Eichmann made that deal, whoever it was. They were going to say for X number of $1 million, you could say, I forget how many it was, a few 100,000 Jews. And we're going to do it then. I mean, if we could. Turns out the deal fell through. But we can't. This situation's a little different because it's obvious. Bennett and his entourage, I don't know how smart they are. And I don't know, I'm not in love with them. Let's put it that way. There's a few people on his team that I have no love for whatsoever.
There was a poll done today. Leon, there was a poll done today in Israel. Who do you want for prime minister? They were asked. The poll said 20% Bennett, 50% Netanyahu. So, I mean, there you go. So
good to hear. And listen, I'm sure everyone has an opinion. I am of the opinion that the Israelis, because I don't live there, the Israelis count. What they want should count. I mean, we're entitled to an opinion from a distance. Of course, we can have an opinion on any damn thing. But I'm glad to hear it. I really am. I mean, I don't want to mention any names. Yair Lapid, not my favorite person. And I just hope that Bennett and his entourage don't cave in. Unlike the previous Eichmann deal, they can't make the deal, i.e., save Jews. And by the way, how many are there really Jews? This is another very important point. I hope we talk about it soon. Out of the hundreds of thousands of, quote, Jews that are escaping out of Ukraine, and I know that there's going to be tons of non-Jews that are going to, all of a sudden, they're Jewish. They're going to run to try and get out of the border and get into Israel. They don't want to live in tents in Poland, believe me.
Ayala Shaked, the interior minister in Israel, she already said today that 90% of those who say they want to come to Israel are not Jewish.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I heard that, I heard that Israel's already got, they've made some plan to temporarily house these non-Jews. But and I know, interesting to hear Ryan and other people's take on this, but the rest of the world is going to use this as an attack on us. They're going to say, what they're
Right.
going to say? Oh, you only care about Jews.
Yeah.
Oh, typical Jews. You only care about yourself. And
Yeah.
guess what? I mean, there's a way to say it, and there's a way for Bennett to bake the case, and he's got to do it properly. But he can't, as you said earlier, we can't piss off Russia. Israel cannot afford to endanger its own people in Israel, its own Jewish people, and all the citizens of Israel, whoever they may be, Christians, Arabs in Israel. He needs to protect them first. So he can't piss off Russia and say, okay, whatever you guys say, Zelensky and all. I mean, I don't want to harp on this. I made the point last time I made it in my blog, and I told you 30,000 views so far in climbing. Zelensky is not a hero. I wish people, especially Jews, would stop saying that. He keeps saying things. I'm disappointed in Bennett, for not taking in more people, for not giving us military aid.
Right.
He doesn't give a crap if Russia bombs, creates a no-fly zone over Syria. Oh, okay. You want to make a no-fly zone over Ukraine, Zelensky? Okay, fine. Then we'll make a no-fly zone over Syria. And the next time Israel flies a sortie over there, tries to shoot some missile batteries or Iranian missile batteries in Syria, guess what? World War III or war with Israel. No. Anyways,
Exactly.
I'll shut up and
Anyways,
give someone else.
we're gonna get into all this. So let's bring Ryan on as well, and then we'll bring
Please.
Ezra on. We'll all discuss this. So Ryan, where's Ryan?
I put him to sleep already.
Oh no. Where'd Ryan go?
It appears that Ryan has left the building, so as soon as he clicks back on, we'll bring it back on, but he's not on screen presently.
Oh,
So let's bring Ezra on, shall we?
yes.
Or David
indeed.
Psalm, whichever you prefer.
Where's Ezra?
Ezra is right there.
There he is.
So Ezra, what is the mood like in Israel with the rescue effort to save the Jews, and what's the talk on the street there right now?
Well, everybody likes the idea of Jews coming back to Israel. I mean, that makes them happy, and I never hear anything negative about that. Jews would like all the Jews of the world to come to live here, and so that's a positive thing. But now I'm sure that with the recent revelation that maybe 90% of, well, actually, they have contingent plans for like up to 200,000 Jews or so to come to live here if they're all halakhically Jewish. But actually, on top of that, it's the rescue plan for just Ukrainian refugees, which they have already 2,000 now, and by the end of the month, they say 15,000, which they admit that 90% are not Jewish. And ironically, they noted that per capita, Israel, except for non-border countries with Ukraine, Israel is actually per capita bringing in more Ukrainian refugees than any country in the world per capita. That means the NATO countries aren't bringing in the refugees. Supposedly, it's been noted that countries like Britain and a few others in Europe saying don't let them come in by plane. They don't want them. But Israel is setting a standard where they want to save Ukrainians and set the example. But we're a small country. We're trying to survive, and maybe people can debate this, but again, once they're here, they'll probably be staying here. Something else that I just read, that there's actually 26,000 Ukrainian foreign workers in Israel, and they're not going to be going back. So that's right off the bat. You got 26,000 people that are probably not going to have a country to go back to, and they're probably going to end up staying here. And then we have at least 15,000 more this month, and then I'm suspecting that there could be another motive behind all this. There's entities in government that maybe they don't have so much faith in God. They worry about the demographic problems. They think that the air problem. So I think part of the reason maybe flooding in non-Jews, taking this opportunity, is maybe to help out the demographic problem and create more, I guess, maybe non-Arabs. We'll have to wait to see how that works out. But as for Jewish refugees, I'm sure if you ask the Jew in the street here, would you want 100,000 Jews from Ukrainian, if they were all Jewish, come here? They would say yes. But now it's going to be tough to see how they'll react to a flood of refugees.
Right.
But
let's bring Ryan on. Ryan just logged on, apparently. Ryan, how you doing?
Hey, Meir, sorry about that. My internet up north here isn't always the best.
Right. And what are you seeing going on with like in the streets? So you have all these rallies for the Ukraine, and people are trying to deny and play down that you have support for Bandera, who was a Nazi collaborator, and you even have the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada that holds a banner that's in that direction. And, they're like condemning the truckers, that they're all racists and Nazis, and we got to seize their bank accounts, but everything's given a pass here. And the history is very clear of the Ukraine, and we're told we have to take that side completely. Don't ask anything.
Yeah, my issue is pretty simple, and it's pretty much like what you said. Look, I think you can support the Ukrainians in their fight against Russia, just because, let's be honest here, Russia attacks civilians. Like, this is not a morally equal struggle right now. But at the same time, I mean, I put this on Facebook 9 years ago, and this just goes to show you, I do hold grudges. 9 years ago, I found out about this monument in Oakville.
Right.
It's in a Ukrainian graveyard, and it has Nazi symbology all over it. And it actually is it's a memorial to Ukrainian Nazis who were from Canada, who went over to the Ukraine to fight the Russians under a Nazi banner. So, I don't really, that's not the kind of stuff I support. And I got to tell you, I think that we should be able to call this stuff out. We should be able to say, look, there were obviously anti-Semites and
now I can't hear anything. What happened with his sound?
That's Ryan's connection. So he's going to log off back on.
Okay, so he'll come right back.
But I feel better. At least it's his internet that went down this time.
Not ours.
Wasn't me.
Okay, so Ezra, so the Ryan's back.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Ryan.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. My internet up here is terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just to finish that thought, like my biggest problem is that I do see people that are marginalizing the Ukrainian anti-Semitism. And here's the thing: the Ukrainian Jewish community has always been a very strong Jewish community, until World War II, when they were pretty much wiped out, right? And there's still a lot of Jews in the Ukraine, but at the same time, to my way of thinking, if you stay in a place like the Ukraine after the Holocaust, I mean, that's got to affect you pretty strongly too. So I mean, I'm not always certain that maybe the people that live there are like as strongly pro-Israel and strongly Zionist as I think most of you should be. But anyway, that's my thing. I don't want to jump on the Ukrainians too hard, because they are fighting a pretty evil group right now, and they're killing civilians. Like, they killed a woman delivering dog food to an animal shelter that hadn't had dog food for a couple days, and the woman was delivering dog food, and they murdered her. I mean, they've been using mortars on civilians. Like,
Right.
and there's video of this, and this is not. I'm not the kind of guy that trusts mainstream media. I literally watched a video where they dropped mortars on people that were just walking in the street, civilians, obvious civilians, not soldiers.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think morally we know who we need to stand with, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean we should forget, the history there.
No, right, and that's why in the Jewish community, like the rescue effort to help the Jews flee from the Ukraine, and also your point about why would they stay there after the Holocaust is, I mean, I can't understand why they would either. That
Yeah.
like there's the
It's
stories
mind-
of Jewish survivors that returned to the Ukraine after the Holocaust to try to reclaim their properties, and they were murdered.
Yeah.
Many. So
By the way, they were murdered by civilian Ukrainians.
right,
There was no, remember, there was no Ukrainian army anymore. They were
Right.
murdered by
Right.
their own neighbors.
right,
Yeah.
right, 100%.
Yeah, it's look, this is we're like you said, Meir, these are extraordinary times, but at the same time, it's scary. And if I was Jewish, like I gotta tell you, I would probably be a little frustrated that people are so easily forgetting the actual history and the things that happened, and the fact that, and I gotta tell you, if I was Israel, I wouldn't be bringing Ukrainian refugees into Israel,
Right.
like non-Jewish Ukrainian refugees. I would move heaven and earth to bring Jewish refugees.
Right.
But I wouldn't bring Ukrainian refugees, non-Jews. I just wouldn't do it.
Ryan, I'm with you. I think we're all with you 100%. The only point I want to make is never the disgusting Ukrainian history aside, for hundreds of years, during World War II, before World War II, the pogroms where they've killed hundreds of thousands of Jews in hundreds of years before World War II. Never mind that. I'm talking about Ukraine today. Ukraine today is painted by the mainstream like it's some beautiful, vacation spot. It's a beautiful country, and I can't tell you how many emails I've got from Jews who tell me, Leon, you don't know what you're talking about. I was there in, I don't know, 2013. I went to Kiev. I went to the shul in Kiev for Purim with the Chabad shul. Thank God for Chabad. Really, thank Baruch Hashem for Chabad. And I went to the shul and I talked to the rabbi, and guess what? We had a great Purim service, and the rabbi said, "We're comfortable here. We have no complaints. We don't feel threatened." And to me, that's his proof to me that I'm nuts when I say that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt places on the planet, and every bloody world leader knows this. Even Joe Biden knows this. NATO knows this. That's why they didn't invite Ukraine into NATO, because they know they're so bloody corrupt they can't be a trusted NATO member. And I said that in my blog. They could have averted this. Maybe, I don't know for sure, but all they had to do was say, NATO, Biden, all the members of NATO said to Zelensky and the hero Zelensky and the Ukrainian government, actually, I should have said this to Putin. We are not going to invite Ukraine into NATO. Finished. Never going to happen. So Putin, relax. Ukraine is not going to be a NATO country. If it was a NATO country, there'd be anti-missiles. There'll be war jets parked there like there are in NATO countries. And you got to see it from Putin's side. He doesn't want that. Can you blame him?
But you have to. I think that's a lot of excuses for Putin. I'll tell you this, like Putin and a lot of the oligarchs, they've made it very clear that to them, and I know it sounds ridiculous to us, but to them, the glory days of the USSR were a good thing, and they want to go back to that because they had a national pride. Yeah, they might have been, they might not have been able to buy butter. They might have had to stand in line to buy food. Everything was rationed, but they had national pride and they felt like they were important in the world. And the problem is Russians themselves, they feel that. They feel now that they're being maligned constantly, that they would rather be at war, and they would rather do these kinds of things where they're basically killing civilians but be relevant on the world stage. Look, they're very proud people. And anybody who follows this stuff knows Putin, that's one thing. He's got a massive ego. And he basically has said he wants to see the return of the USSR, where Russia is at the forefront of the world, right? So I mean, like, it didn't, all this stuff with NATO, that was just excuses. Like, they knew damn well that NATO's never going to let Ukraine in.
Well,
That was
look,
they made it clear.
like I said, would it have averted this? I don't know, and you don't know. Okay, we don't know, but one thing we do know, it would have cost them, NATO and Biden, nothing to try. Nothing.
But the thing is too, and I get where you're coming from. I think a bigger problem is the fact that Biden's in charge of the United States,
Yes.
and after he abandoned Afghanistan, and they've
Yes.
seen how Biden, keeps his word
Exactly.
to his allies.
Of course.
Yes.
I mean, and yeah, you know what? That's a great thing to segue into, because now these same people who are telling us, how Biden's doing all these great things for the United States, and we've seen with the eyeball test, we've seen what they've done now with their allies, and we're supposed to take Biden's word that they're going to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons
Right.
and using
Well-
those weapons. And,
Well,
and
you
I'm
hit
sorry,
the nail
but
on
I'm
the
not-
head.
Yeah, I'm not
Ryan, you
willing
hit
to
the nail
just
on
like
the
that.
head. Therein lies the problem. Joe Biden, the U.S. administration, we all know it. Any idiot knows that, unless they've got their head in the sand or somewhere else. So,
And he
that's
does
the
not have
problem.
Israel's back. There's no question about it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no
Like,
question
and
about it.
if
it's insane.
like him or hate him, if Trump was president, we wouldn't be here now. We would be having this discussion. There would likely be no war. There wasn't with Trump. Putin had a good relation with Trump. He was scared of Trump, as
Well,
were
I don't know.
North Korea and China.
I don't know if they were scared of him, but I know that they definitely, there was a thing with Trump where you never quite knew what he was going to do,
Right. Unpredictable.
which is a good thing for a leader. Like with Biden, you know that he's going to be like a Chamberlain, right? He's going to be peace in our time. He's that guy.
He's a puppet. He's a puppet.
Yeah, but with a guy like Trump, and as much as I disliked him personally, the one thing on a world stage, people did not take him for granted because they would be worried about what he was going to do.
Right.
And because you never know with people like Trump, you never know what they're going to do. With Biden, you know what you're going to get. You're getting Obama 2.0. That's what it is.
Right.
And the scariest thing for me is, like, we're sitting here talking about the Ukraine. Meanwhile, in Canada, and it's funny, people tell me, "Oh, you shouldn't complain about it. Look at the Ukraine." Why wouldn't I not complain? Gas where I live is at an insane all-time high. I can't afford to go to the town to buy groceries. Yeah, that concerns me a little bit more than a war across the world. Like,
Right.
and I'm also concerned of the fact that Iran is really close to getting nuclear weapons. I'm more concerned about that than I am about the Ukraine, to be honest, because we all know if Iran gets nuclear weapons, they'll use them. They've said they will.
100%. Again,
So,
that's what I was trying to elucidate in my blogs and my emails lately, is that this is a perfect diversion for us. The mainstream media is pushing it. The nefarious governments, the World Economic Forum, all these bad guys are pushing this narrative. It's the best distraction since COVID. Better even right now. World war, war.
Right.
I'm concerned about the price of gas, and I'm concerned about Iran. They're rushing ahead. No one's watching them now. They're going crazy.
And you know what? I guess for that reason, when the poll came out today that showed the majority of Israelis want Netanyahu as the prime minister, and a minority, really low numbers for Bennett or Lapid or Gantz, very low numbers. In spite of Bennett doing something unbelievable, meeting with Putin on Shabbat. He keeps Shabbat, so he did that because he wants to save. I mean, you're allowed to do that according to Jewish law to do that, so he does that. And he's on the world stage. In spite of that, the poll comes out, the vast majority of Israelis want Netanyahu because we have that issue of Iran. We have the negotiations going on right now. And if Iran gets the bomb or is is too close to getting the bomb, then who do you want as the prime minister defending Israel? So the
Exactly.
people, the Jewish public in Israel is saying, we want Netanyahu there. We don't want you there in spite of everything that you're trying to do.
It's like, Meir, it's like World War II,
Good
right?
deal.
Like you look at the
Yes.
end of World War II, and the English voted out Winston Churchill, right?
Yes.
And
Right.
then as soon as the Korean War started, all the Brits were like, wait a minute, we need somebody that we can trust if we're
Right.
on the verge of another war.
Right.
You go with the people you trust. Look, I'm not a huge fan of Netanyahu, but at the same time, he is a guy he's battle proven when it comes to this kind of stuff. He
Right.
will have
Right.
Israel's best interests.
Right.
And we can't really say that about Bennett, because I mean, this is a guy who basically allied himself with anti-Zionist parties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's
Can
what
you
I've
really-
been saying.
Yeah, like as much as I wanted to like the guy, as soon as he's done that, I mean, it's really difficult to support that.
And obviously in his party, when you have the interior minister, Ayelet Shaked, she says 90% of the Ukrainians who want to come here are not even Jewish at all.
Yeah.
And so, but in that coalition government, you have segments that are from the far left, and obviously the Arab Party as well, that, you know,
Yeah,
They're
they'd be
okay
perfectly
with it.
happy. Yeah.
They're okay with it.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
in the other Aliyah, when they were bringing people over from the former USSR, how many non-Jews came to Israel? I mean, I
Plenty.
was just reading there Sarah Tuttle Singer in her stupid blog about that.
Yeah.
Oh, the two Russian Jews that aren't really Jewish, and they met buying pork in Tel Aviv. And all I'm thinking to myself is, are they actually even Jewish? Because like I have lots of Russian friends who came right out and told me, yeah, like my 15th cousin, who's not even really related to us,
Right.
he's not Jewish, but he wanted to get out of the USSR, so they're in Israel now,
Right.
and they've been here for 20 years. Like,
Yeah.
and it's tough. You're in a tough spot because you don't want to leave any Jews behind, but at the same time, how do you go through and how do you determine who's actually Jewish? How do you, like you guys have your
Well,
own
look.
rules for that. Maybe you should just follow them. I don't know.
Ezra, you're in Israel.
I
You're
think,
hearing it. What are you hearing
if
in
I was-
Israel, Ezra? Tell us.
Well, if I was to add, right now, to facilitate Jewish immigration, historically it's been so there's been so many red tape and obstacles that Jews are afraid to do Aliyah because the difficulty in the entire process is such a long and arduous process that Jews don't do it, and plus they might feel they don't have the support and they don't have the encouragement, and there's not enough PR to inspire them to come. But I think right now we have to get the Jews that are really Jews to do a PR campaign and to create changes in law to make it easy to facilitate to those who we know are Jewish, and there's millions out there, to make them want to come and to live here. And part of that campaign is to actually, bring forth a reality warning, because what's happening in Ukraine it's really just a match. Every country in the world seems to be disintegrating. America could easily be a nation of persecuting Jews. They're disintegrating. We've seen it was going on the last couple of years with the riots in some of the cities. And if civil breakdown were to continue in America, we know from history, Jews are going to be persecuted. In Canada, they also have problems with government standards being diminished. I've heard recently they want to ban Fox. Well, isn't that what communist countries usually do? They ban the competition. So whether the government in Canada could do that or not, but everywhere in the world, we see governments are disintegrating. That's a warning message to every Jew on the planet Earth that needs to be elevated and reach the ears, and the governmental powers in Israel have to make it clear, we want you home. We need you home. It's for your security, and it's also for the elevation of our own nation. Like even Herzl said, whatever Jews do in their country will rebound and benefit all of mankind. So you know what? It's in the interest of all of humanity that the Jews come home, and the government's got to do something to inspire them and to facilitate them in the process of doing Aliyah and not create so much red tape that it becomes such a process that it becomes very, very difficult. And there's a housing shortage. There's a lot of concerns they have financially. They need to do building campaigns to make life affordable for Jews who want to do Aliyah. It takes a lot of investment and courage, but I believe that a lot of Jews want to do Aliyah, but we have to make it easy for Jews to come to live here. And right now, it's difficult to make that jump across the sea, or for wherever you may be in the world as a Jew, to come here, even though a lot of them are seeing the writing on the wall. To make that little extra step, they need that help. And it's
Ezra, the one thing though, you're looking at this strictly from a we just need to get more Jews in Israel kind of point of view. I'm looking at it from we see these leftists that are moving to Israel specifically to weaken the country. So I get it. Like, look, I'm with you. I think everybody that can should make Aliyah, but I also know a lot of these people that are making Aliyah are doing it specifically to cause problems. And that's why I think there's so much red tape. It's unfortunate, but how do you solve that problem?
Well, I would say Jews do Aliyah usually when it comes to refugees, whether from the former Soviet Union or maybe Ukraine and other places. That's a different story. And a lot of those are the ones who may not be Jewish. But when it comes to Aliyah, there's a process, and usually they're Jews, and it's easier for them to open the doors to refugees and bring in tens of thousands of them in and absorb them. And they don't have to go through any process. But for a Jew to want to do Aliyah, there's such a terrible process of red tape, and that. But if you're not Jewish, we've got open arms. But if you're Jewish, we're going to make it very difficult for you to come here, and that's got to be changed. And I think that, again, I noted that I think there's powers at work that don't really want as many Jews here because they don't necessarily want a Jewish state. They want an Israeli state. That was even Shimon Peres said that. He wanted an Israeli state. It was not a state of the Jews. Like
there are people on the left, the New Israel
Jews.
Fund and J Street, that type of thinking, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But
Ezra, can I ask you a very specific question? How difficult was it for you to make Aliyah in terms of proving that you're Jewish?
There was lots of difficulty, but besides that, it's the red tape in the paperwork, which even though, COVID was a little bit of a problem in it, they keep adding more restrictions. Like one of the things they just added recently is you need to have a federal criminal background check. So I did that. I had it. It cost me $200 to do the process. Has to go to the RCMP and then to Global Affairs. I have to get fingerprints. Then it goes to the Jewish Agency. Then it has to go to the consulate for a stamp. Well, the first time I did it, I got the paperwork. Finally got it into them, and then they had it for 5 months. And then I get a call from Nefesh B'Nefesh. You got 2 weeks to do Aliyah because your paperwork's expiring. Well, they said it expires in 6 months. So guess what? Obviously, no one can just facilitate uprooting from your place to move to a place in Israel, send your things by shipping, and it just expired. And I had to do it all over again. That means they made it an impossibility. My friend who did Aliyah, he worked in America 35 years ago for like about 1 year, I think at a yeshiva. And he had to get an FBI criminal background check and a Canadian criminal background check, and it caused a lot of problems. So they're making, and this is just a new thing. But if you're a refugee from Ukraine or anywhere in the world, come. It doesn't matter. Just come. But okay, I'm not. People might be moved by compassion for refugees. Okay, I'm not going there on that. I'm just saying that if we could have a flood of Jews, and there are millions, come to Israel, real Jews, then make it easy for them. Make it easy. It doesn't have to be so difficult. And it may be the problem is that a lot of these Jews are religious, and maybe again that are doing Aliyah, and maybe there's some people that don't like that idea. Conceivably, I don't know, but we got to make it easy for Jews to do Aliyah. You know,
Ezra,
make
the
it
reason
easy.
sorry, I'm sure we all agree with every word you just said, and I hope the Israeli government's listening to you. But the reason I asked that specific question is as it relates to Ukraine. Right now, we said there's I don't know, a couple hundreds of thousands of people trying to get out of there, claiming to be Jewish. So they're going, to Poland, they're going to the neighboring countries, and because of who we are providing the way for them out of there. I don't know that the other countries in the world are doing even a half a good as job as we are. And I say we, I mean
Well,
Israel.
they're not. Per capita, Israel's taking in more refugees. I mean, in
Right.
one sense, you can say, "Hey, it is proof that we're a compassionate people." That it is. I mean, it's a nice thing when you think about it in that perspective that we do care for other people. Even sometimes when it hurts ourselves, we still reach out to them. And just that we're such a small nation. That's why it's becoming. We just can't
Right.
absorb
Yeah, it's
We,
foolish.
so
we if
many.
the
But
world can't understand this simple precept, look after your own first.
Yep.
That's a simple precept that any person in the world should be able to understand and agree with that. So we are no different than anyone else. We need to and should look after our own first.
Yeah.
Uh,
Look, I
it's
think that
nothing
there's
new.
other countries. There's other countries that are big enough. Like Canada, we've got
Right.
lots of space. Like, I've said this. I have no problem with bringing in Ukrainian refugees. It doesn't bother me to bring them to Canada. Yeah, bring them here. But at the same time, we're struggling right now in Canada with our economy and with a lot of other things. So, I mean, like you said, we need to do this stuff, but we need to do it with. We can't just do it helter skelter. You have to do it intelligently.
Europe is a big continent.
Exactly. There's lots of space for these people. You know what I do like, and I will say this: one thing I do like about the Ukrainians right now is that they're actually telling the young men, "No, we don't want you to leave. We want you to stay here and fight for your country." And I do think that there's something to be said for that. You need to say, okay, at some point, do you want to just run away, or are you going to try and stay? And for the actual Ukrainians, I mean, that's why I believe we should be supporting them, because they want to fight, they want to stay and fight for their country. Well, then you try to help them do that. But yeah, this whole idea that we're going to solve all the world's problems by sending all these refugees to a tiny country like Israel, that's over. That's just ridiculous.
Oh yeah, and the BDS is launching a campaign. Look at Israel; they just want to let in Jews, and you'll see the new Israel Fund, J Street, and that they'll say, "Ayala Shaked, look what she just said." If you go on Twitter, you'll see all that already. That's happening. She just made the statement today, but there will be these campaigns delegitimizing Israel, saying Israel has no right to be a Jewish state.
Yeah, well, that's at the end of it all. That's the truth of it. They don't want Israel to be a Jewish state, and the lefties that are a lot of them in positions of power in Israel, and I think Ezra spoke to this. Look, like they don't want to bring in more religious Jews, because if they bring in religious Jews, that's going to skew their percentages in Israel, and all of a sudden you already have like the Dati Lumi, like, and all the settlers starting to find their voice, and I think that there's a significant portion of the left in Israel that doesn't like that. They want to keep everything as secular as possible, and they don't want to move more towards being more religious and more observant. Yeah, and I think that's a significant problem you guys have there too.
Big time.
Yeah, absolutely. Bingo.
So,
Ezra, what's the talk on the streets regarding the Iran nuclear talks that are going on? Also, what's the talk in Israel?
Well, everybody's concerned about what's going on in Iran, and it seems, that I almost wonder if the nations of the world, we know the nations of the world, whatever decision they make on any subject matter, they never truly, even if they say it, have the Jewish state's well-being on their radar screen. It doesn't exist. Right. So whatever they're going to do, if what they make an agreement with Iran, it's going to be based on something that suits them personally, even if it meant sacrificing the Jewish state. So it's impossible for them to make it a decent agreement. So really, it's totally now in the hands of Israel, and of course, and Hashem. Of course, he's the one who is in charge of the universe. But we have to make the contingencies to be able to deal with that threat militarily, because we utterly know we can't trust the nations. They don't have a benefit. They're making decisions that suits them, even if it would put the existence of Israel at stake. And we have to have that in our psyche at all times. And if and I'm betting that Israel. I know Netanyahu always wanted, was preparing for stuff like that. I hopefully Bennett and the IDF has their plans, and I think that's typical of what Israel does. That they'll protect themselves first, and it's going to probably end up coming to that. Iran at some point, they know that if they do something to attack Israel, probably the way that all the nations of the world are disintegrating right now, they're not going to get the repercussions from it, and now they'll be more emboldened than ever. And I think that also now Israel's becoming very wealthy in natural gas and are working on a pipeline that would go into the European Union through Cyprus and Greece. Israel's a big threat to Russia.
Too bad Biden canceled that.
So yeah, Russia would support Iran. They're weakening Israel. I mean, they're supporting Syria, which is supporting Hezbollah, and Iran supporting all that. And the threat from Iran, it's in Russia's interest actually to diminish Israel in the long term, because they see them as a threat when it comes to the natural gas supplies. And I saw a video someone sent me. In fact, there's a major concern with Russia with the Ukraine of their own discovered reserves and other natural resources that could be competition for Russia. And it's another motive that's not really talked about in the news, but it is Ukraine is also a threat in that department too when it comes to gas. So a lot of dynamics, but again, tough world. We're going to look up to Hashem, the king, who's going to save us.
Leon, let me ask you. So you touched on it a little bit, anyways, but how the Ukraine votes in the UN. You want to fill the viewers in on the UN's Ukraine's track record voting against Israel?
If I'm not mistaken, correct me on this. I think they've had 3 votes. Maybe since Zelensky was in charge, where out of the 3, 2 they voted in favor of the UN condemnations of Israel, and 1 they abstained.
Yep.
So there's the record of Ukraine. So he abstains or votes with Israel's enemies who want Israel wiped off the map. He votes in favor of that, the Jewish hero guy, and his country with Jewish oligarchs are his buddies too. He's got the same Jewish oligarch friends and other oligarchs that Putin has, by the way. Right. So enough of the Jewish crap. I'm tired of hearing it.
Right.
It's frankly irrelevant. The point is, if we had to rely on Ukraine to help us the way that Ukraine expects Israel to help them now, I think we should, quote, abstain from helping them. In other words, don't you dare. Here's an interesting point my buddy Fred told me about just before getting on. Are you aware of the Spike missiles that Israel Rafael Systems builds? They are the world's best anti-tank missiles. The world's best. They're better than whatever the Stinger or the other missiles that everyone talks about on the mainstream. Israel gave them to NATO countries like Poland, with one caveat: you can't use them unless unless we give you our permission to use it. The same way that any country donates military weapons, the way the U.S. gives jets and military aid to Israel, they can't resell it to India without U.S. permission, right?
Right.
So this is what I'm worried about. If Poland and these countries that have them, these NATO countries, decide, hey, you know what? We had an agreement with Israel. We'll just forget about that agreement. I mean, it's a piece of paper, right? Let's give them to Ukraine, because Poland hates Russia and they're all scared of Russia, and they certainly can't rely on the states to protect them because the whole world knows that you can't rely on the states for anything but tourists. That's trouble, Ryan. So if
Yes.
they, in fact, God forbid, give them to Ukraine, and Ukraine uses them to shoot down a Russian jet or anything, that will immediately give Russia the excuse to go on the attack to Israel, like what Israel was talking about earlier, all the various interests that Russia has with the Arab and Muslim countries like Iran, Syria, et cetera, et cetera. That could mean big trouble for Israel. So we got lots of concerns there, and I could tell you again, we got to be careful. Of course, we need to supply humanitarian aid whenever we can. Canada is doing it. I mean, every country in the world, pretty much. I don't know every country, but most countries in the world are on board with helping Ukraine, the Ukrainian citizens. And look, Ryan, you mentioned it. I hear it on the radio. Talk 1010. They made a big deal about some Ukrainian soldier. It was a soccer player, some famous soccer player who was lined up to play soccer here in Canada. And guess what? He's now going to go back to Ukraine. He was born in Ukraine, and he's going to fight. Okay, good, go. But I don't call that heroic. If you want to do that, go ahead. Not my business. And I'm not calling you a hero. Go fight for your country. Yes, Russia had no business invading you. I mean, maybe they had a tiny little business, but generally speaking, no, of course. The whole world knows that Russia had, they were unprovoked. Let's put it that way. So, and millions of people are going to suffer, including us. We're not going to suffer. We're not going to be, quote, killed with a shrapnel or a bullet in the head, but we're going to suffer. So,
Leon,
this is all bad.
Leon, the bottom line is, I mean, somebody in the chat made a comment that the Ukraine sometimes will abstain in the UN. And then the comment was also that Russia virtually always votes against Israel. But here's the deal. Israel has to think, number one, and the Jewish people has to think, number one, about our self-interest. That's the way the world works.
Exactly.
Self-interest, the safety and security of Israel. That's paramount for Israel. No questions asked. And when it comes to Israel, Israel is engaged in a battle against Iran. And Iran is trying to set up bases surrounding Israel. And they're trying to establish a serious base in Syria. Israel has some kind of an understanding with Russia that we could fire at Iranian assets in Syria as long as we don't come into conflict with Russian anything they have there. There is that understanding going on. Netanyahu was able to put that together, and it has worked till now. The Ukraine, they're not a player in that game. So therefore, Israel, looking after its interests, has to have whatever relations that they have, whatever good terms or goodwill with Russia, they have to do what's best for themselves. That's it.
That's the bottom line, Meir.
Regardless how they're voting at the UN. There is this understanding, and it's good for Israel to have that kind of understanding. If the Ukraine says, we don't want you having that understanding, well, screw you.
Yeah, too bad. Look, I think Israel is playing it right so far. They're playing it right down the road as they have to. It's good for Israel to maintain good relationships with Ukraine, the same way it's good for them to maintain good relationships with every country in the world,
Yep.
if possible. I mean, look, they have relationships with China, even though they know who China is. But they have very good relationships with India, who's a world
Right.
power. So, I mean, Mayor, you hit it on the head. Your own self-interest is paramount. Every country in the world operates that way and should operate that way.
But you
And
have to, Leon. The only problem with that, and I'm gonna be blunt because I think we're ignoring the elephant in the room.
Go ahead.
It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what Israel does. You guys are gonna get shit on anyway.
Sure.
Let's be 100% honest. It doesn't matter. You guys could play everything politically perfectly, and you're still going to get maligned in the UN. There's still going to be condemnations.
Of course.
So what you really have to do now is not just look at what's best for Israel, but what's optically the best for Israel, right? Not just what is actually the best, but what looks like it's the best. Because you're in trouble right now because there are a lot of people, even in Canada, there's people that don't realize that Iran has basically said that as soon as they get nukes, they're going to drop one on Tel Aviv. Why? Because they think if they can bring on the apocalypse, that they're going to usher in an era of Islamic dominance. Yep. And there are still people like that have this Joe Biden mindset. Oh, they wouldn't do that. Why would they do that? They want the same things we want. They just want peace and prosperity. It's like, no, they want peace and prosperity under Islamic dominance, which means dropping a nuke. And that's why people need to understand this stuff. Look, in a perfect world, everybody gets to do what they think is what's best for them and their people in a perfect world. In the real world, you have to be more concerned about, if I do this, what are the repercussions? They call it the so what. The so what. It's the 7 so whats. So when you say something, someone says, okay, so what? Then you have to explain what. And then you do it again, and you keep going until you find at the end of the 7, you're supposed to find what the actual root cause of something is. And the truth of it is, there's a lot of Jew hate in the world right now, and Iran and Russia are behind quite a bit of it. Russia, people keep forgetting. Russia is literally the people that were behind the Durban conference. They're the ones that started this settler colonialist bullshit. That Jewish indigenous people are actually colonizers on their own ancestral land. That's Russian propaganda from the 1960s. And I mean, like, Russia is a very dangerous, like, I know we laugh, and we're laughing because they got hammered out by the Ukrainians. I mean, you look at the disparity in casualties. The Russians have taken tons of casualties because they were driving columns down the highway with no security out. And they lost 56 tanks in one engagement, and they lost one of the commanding generals of the invading force because they were too stupid to actually put out scouts. So, I mean, we're laughing at this stuff, but the truth of the matter is it's a conscript army, and it's still a very dangerous army because of its size. But the elite troops of the Russians, like the Spetsnaz, like the tier 1 kind of operator people, they're just as good as any in the world. So we can't lose sight of the fact that they are still dangerous. And those troops that are in Syria, a lot of them might be conscripts, but a lot of them are actually combat veterans, and a lot of them are like tier 1 operators. So Israel's got to be super careful. And like you said, Meir, that whole deal that they had, and Leon brought it up too, there is a deal that Israel won't hit Russian assets inside the borders of Syria, even if the Iranians are trying to embed near them. However, as soon as those Iranians go anywhere away from the Russians, Israel hammers them out, and we hear about it on the news. So,
Ryan, I'm a little confused about your comment, though. You're trying to make the case that we should pay more attention to the optics over.
No, on the optics on what's actually okay. So you do what's best for your country, right? But you guys have the added problem of understanding that the optics are super important, because no matter what you do, you're going to get shit on. So, and that's just the truth. So now you have to be careful.
So Ryan, so Ryan, I think I get your point, but I see a bit of a conundrum. I don't want to harp on this, but you said on the one hand, we're going to get shit on no matter what we do. I think everyone, all of us agree with that one. I mean, we've known that for hundreds or thousands of years, and it's going to be that way forever. But on the other hand, at the same time, you also say that the optics are important. I
Yeah.
say it, look at it this way, Ryan, straight. And I think Rabbi Kahani's with me. We have to do what's best for us and give this to
That
the
doesn't work.
ones who don't.
As,
Well,
as much
Ryan,
as much as I would like for that to be the case, it makes it worse. Look, there's still degrees here. You have to understand. There's levels of shit. Okay. So you can get like the little bit of shit that you know you're gonna get no matter what, because you're gonna get it
Right.
because you're Jews, and they're gonna shit on you because
Right.
you're Jews.
no matter
Or-
what we do.
Or you can get the dump truck of shit that they really want to drop on you every time you make any sort of mistake, right? And that's what they're waiting for. Look, the whole idea, even BDS, all of this stuff, it's all about how much can they shit on the Jews, not are they going to shit on you. You know they're going to shit
Right.
on you.
Of course.
But now they're waiting, because if you make even a small mistake, they can dump a truckload of it on you. And that's why, like, I wish it was that simple that we could just give them one of these, because the way I operate in my life is if someone pisses me off, I'm not averse to giving them some percussive education. But the reality is, like, now that I'm a little bit more out in the public, if I give somebody some percussive education, I could end up in jail. So I have to be a little more careful with stuff like that now. I'm not
Right.
25 years old anymore either. So
Look,
And-
look, the right way to do it is with balance. I mean, all of my point is simple. At the end of the day, Israel has to do what's best for itself. You can't always be looking behind you. And what does the EU say if I annex these territories and make them Israel proper? I think I would think that we've learned that lesson over the years already. So
Well, and
there's
I'm not
ways
saying,
to.
look, I'm not saying you abnegate. Look, that, again, like we don't want to fall in that trap of where we start getting maximalist, where it's either or. I'm not saying you
Right, we
shouldn't
have to
do
do
what's
both.
best for Israel. Yeah, you have to try and find a way to do both. And I know it's
Right.
hard and it's not fair, but that's
Right.
my whole point, is that maybe we can't be
course.
quite as aggressive as we would like to be. Look, if it was up to me, I'd say annex the entirety of Judea and Samaria. And I would say, hey, Catholic Church, you got a bunch of our stuff in your basement. Either give it
Right.
back or we're taking all of your churches. I mean, I would be way harsher than you guys. I'm telling you that right now.
Right.
I mean, the temple would be, if Ryan Bellerose was the dictator, the temple would be getting built tomorrow. Right?
Right.
There wouldn't be a golden pimple on the Temple Mount anymore. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely.
But I
Ryan,
mean, but I also
that's
know
why we
that,
love you, man.
Yeah. I'm a little bit extreme sometimes, I know.
That's not extreme. No, that's just, I mean, we read it in the Torah. We're building the tabernacle. We're going to Israel. It's repetition, repetition, repetition. That's there. That's in every synagogue. That's what we say. It's in all our prayers. And the aspiration is for the rebuilding of the temple. What is a mosque doing on our spot? And we have to tolerate Hamas flags?
Yeah.
There, it's a bunch of nonsense. It's
Yeah,
Shoot me.
I know, and trust me, I know that it would cause all kinds of trouble. But like I always tell my friends, like anything a Jew does in Israel is going to cause World War III, right? You guys build a balcony and it's a war crime. So, I mean, at this point, like but I still think you got to try to at least try to deal with the stuff optically, at least try.
Yeah, we are. So, Meir, you want to bring the other guy on?
Oh, David Schoen. We got we have a little clip of just a few minutes long that Gary did a short interview with him. We were going to have him on the show, but he had all kinds of legal issues that he had to work on tonight. So there was a little clip made with him earlier today. So we could show that, and we'll hear from David Schoen, who is the chairman of the board of the Zionist Organization of America. He's a great guy, and he represented Donald Trump at an impeachment hearing. Great lawyer, great guy, good Jewish guy, knows the issues backwards and forwards, and would have been a pleasure to have him on live. But let's just see. Our doctor in the studio, do you have that?
Okay, let's speed it up. As Meir said, Dave was supposed to be with us this evening, but due to a last-minute important document he needed for the government, and we know how important the government is, that he was unable to be with us. So I did have the opportunity to speak with him this afternoon for a while. I edited it down to 5 or 10 minutes, but it'll also be available on our israelnow.ca Facebook page, our website, as well as on YouTube. So the short clip of David's song will be available independently as well as with tonight's episode. So without any further ado, let's hear what David had to say.
Okay.
So as I said, I did get the opportunity to speak with him today. David wears many hats for many different interests in his life. He wears many hats, yarmulkes, and occasionally his hands to show respect and honor to Hashem. Today, we're going to use his legal expertise and his Zionist passion just to get his opinion, input, and wisdom regarding the awful situation presently going on between Ukraine and Russia. Based in the interest of time, I'm just going to turn it over to David. And David, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Listen, I think that without question, based on reports that we're seeing, there are war crimes being committed today by Russia in the Ukraine. There's the intentional, indiscriminate shelling of civilian areas. And now we're getting reports specifically to block evacuations. Supposedly there have been negotiations for humanitarian routes to be opened up. Those routes are being closed by bombings and shellings going on where the civilians are trying to get out. It's a horrific situation. Just to give a little perspective from the Jewish point of view, there's a tremendous Jewish history in the Ukraine. It goes back probably over 1,000 years. I believe today it's accurate to say the Jewish population in Ukraine is the third largest in Europe and the fifth largest in the world, from reports that I've seen. There may be as many as 400,000 Jews living in the Ukraine today. It's got a tremendous history, Jewish history, history of Hasidism, starting there, Baal Shem Tov, and so on, going back to the late 1600s, early 1700s. In the early part of the 20th century, Yiddish was actually on the currency in the Ukraine. So tremendous Jewish presence and history.
So we have the Baal Shem Tov born in the 1600s in Western Ukraine. And as David mentioned, on the currency for a few years, the currency was written in Ukrainian, Russian, as well as Yiddish. So for a short time period, we actually had the delusion and illusion of being respected by this country.
That presence also, though, has to be noted during the Holocaust period. Some of the most horrific tragedies, probably around, we think, 900,000 Jews killed in the Ukraine. Estimates are something like 100,000 Ukrainian collaborators with the Nazis. Most famous massacre of all, of course, was Babi Yar. Some 33,771 Jews, is the figure generally used, killed within a 2-day period in September of 1941.
Again, the Holocaust was very active in the Ukraine. They had concentration camps, Jewish ghettos, and as David mentioned, the most barbaric situation in any short period of time was over 33,000 Jews being murdered in a 2-day period. And there they are, just lined up shooting the Jews. The Jews were told to bring their belongings with them to Babi Yar because they were going to be moved to another location. So they were deceptively brought there, lined up, and shot for a 2-day time period. 33,771 Jews. This is Ukraine, the land that we're constantly discussing these days, but not to forget that they were with the Russians, many of them during the Holocaust, and with the Nazis. So it's hard to say who they ally with.
So there's a long history for Jews there. On one other front, I have to say, it's being used propaganda purposes today. There's an article out today by a Jordanian journalist, former member of the Jordanian parliament, rooting for Russia, saying the Arab countries should root for Russia, and that, but they sympathize with Ukrainians for having to live under a Zionist occupation. As many of the viewers know, I'm sure, the leader of the Ukraine, is Jewish, Mr. Zelensky. And he's shown great courage and backbone during the course of this. Not clear at all where this thing is going. Obviously, Mr. Putin's getting more than he had planned for, but seems to just have a brutal agenda.
So what was the reaction to the Arab countries? Well, the majority of the Arab countries kept silent. The Arab League took a neutral position, expressing, quote, concern for the events. It sounds like Obama talking about the event in France many years ago, where some people killed some people. They're talking about a neutral position for the concern regarding the events. I think that's downplaying it at least. And of course, a Palestinian activist said it's hypocritical for the West to support Ukrainian resistance when they're not supporting Palestinian resistance. Again, everything gets brought back to anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in the Arab world. In Lebanon, the pro-Hezbollah camp is sided completely with Putin, of course. That should be no surprise.
I see now with some great interest that two leaders in Israel are trying to conduct negotiations. Apparently, Mr. Bennett is on his way or had been in Russia in negotiations, certainly been on the telephone before that. Mr. Lapid was going to the Ukraine to meet with Anthony Blinken from the United States. So there's a big Jewish connection, major Jewish fundraising going on for humanitarian purposes. There's something like 300,000 Jews in New York alone from the former Soviet Union. Major fundraising going on to try to help orphans.
And there they are. We certainly are not going to be informed exactly what they discussed, but certainly shows Israel's desire to play the part that America used to play. And now with Biden, Israel is leading the world in their trying to be neutral as often as possible and trying to resolve conflicts internationally.
I see now with some great interest that two leaders in Israel are trying to conduct negotiations. Apparently, Mr. Bennett is on his way or has
a little
been
redundant,
in Russia
but we'll move on in a moment.
Certainly been on the telephone before that. Mr. Lapid was going to the Ukraine to meet with Anthony Blinken from the United States. So there's a big Jewish connection, major Jewish fundraising going on for humanitarian purposes. There's something like 300,000 Jews in New York alone from the former Soviet Union. Major fundraising going on to try to help orphans. There's one very moving story. Stand With Us did a piece on actually about a group of orphans being rescued. We estimate now, something like well over 1 million, maybe 1.5 million refugees already. Just a tragic, tragic situation. I don't know what else to say. I don't know, because, Mr. Putin has very hardened positions, and many experts have suggested he has much more grandiose plans to go into Europe and so on. But I think that I think he's lost no matter what. Even if he were to win this battle, he'll never be able to successfully occupy Ukraine and get the cooperation of the citizens. I don't think. Force only goes so far. Can't buy goodwill with it. And he's now, determined his legacy for the world. So I don't know. I don't know if the sanctions are going to make a difference. I don't think we seem to be serious enough sanctions. Seems like a no-brainer to stop the oil imports, but we don't seem to be willing to do that. I saw a piece today that Poland wanted to send planes in to the Ukraine to help the Ukrainian Air Force, but they wanted them replaced by the United States. We've refused to replace those planes. The administration has anyway. Some members of Congress are in favor of it. And we say because that would, could lead to an escalation. Nobody wants an escalation, but at some point when such grave humanitarian rights are at issue and crimes being committed, we have to step up.
Although we understand that Ukraine is not part of NATO, basically, functionally, Ukraine acts as a buffer zone between Russia and NATO. So why do you think that NATO is risking Russia taking over Ukraine and then having just a border where Russia can do whatever they want with NATO? And based on his Putin's history, he wouldn't hesitate to do so. Yeah,
I guess one word: nukes. That's their deterrent works. I don't buy the excuses that NATO uses. I think it's plain and simple. They don't want to get into a conflict with Russia, period, which they think they might lose and be devastated in. But again, at some point in the past, great world leaders have shown backbone, even against great odds. World leaders in the past have understood that Russia only understands strength. We've seen that over and over again. Nixon and Kennedy proved it. Mr. Reagan proved it. But I don't know that any expert has any perfect answer, or that there are any experts in these situations.
My last question, just regarding your opinion, is when Elon Musk goes and is willing to compromise his wealth and income and suggests that we do more oil production in America, and yet Biden continues to purchase petroleum products from Russia. I mean, is there any explanation for this behavior by the American establishment presently?
I don't think there's any reasonable explanation for it. I think it's an absolute mistake. I think Keystone has to be reactivated. I think there was a very interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal by two Alaskans about the rich resources there we could be tapping into. We have to become more self-sufficient. This perfectly illustrates the situation. No, I don't understand it, but unfortunately, politics seems to infect public policy far too often. Doesn't make any sense. I think that has to be exposed more and more, and people have to speak out. That's all.
That I always appreciate you spending the time with us. I know how busy your schedule is. Perhaps sometime over the next few months you can actually sit more leisurely live. But for now, enjoy or be productive with the rest of your day. And it's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, there you go. No, 100%. It's a horrible situation going on, but how's it going to end? Israel stepping up to the plate, doing the maximum. There's always going to be pressure on Israel. One bit of news that came out earlier today, or maybe it was last night, was that Russia's complaining about the sanctions imposed on them, that it's stalling the Iranian talks, the nuke talks with Iran. So hopefully, maybe those talks will fall apart, and they just won't happen anymore. And the Iranian issue could be taken care of better. Ezra needs to go. Okay, Ezra, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be signing off pretty soon anyways. Let's go with final comments by everyone. Ezra, do you have a final comment?
Well, it's just looking at the bigger picture again. What Russia, I think, did is evil, and NATO not allowing Russian to go in and not supporting them, sort of like making them a sacrifice. But I think that if NATO thinks that the NATO countries can avoid evil by letting Russia take over Ukraine, it's really the same evil is going to eventually visit them. I think history shows that you just can't. And I think that as Jews, we have to look at how we're going to save ourselves and save Jews around the world in a disintegrating world, and look to Hashem, who's going to save us, but take the active measures to save our people around the world, especially now, let's say the Jews in Ukraine. And then I think that should be our focus, because we can see that everything's unraveling, and I think that this is going to continue to get worse, not better, in the short term, and that we have to think about what we're going to do to save our people and in Israel and around the world.
Ezra, one quick question. So you just moved to Israel, I don't know, I think a few months ago, something like, give or take. Okay, so you're all your life in Toronto, now in Israel, waking up in Israel. How do you feel? Tell us the difference. How do you feel?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what I tell every single person.
Yep.
I have so much shalom, even though Israel might, it appears to have a lot of problems. The truth of the matter is, inside your neshama, inside your soul, there's this peace that I'm here. Somehow I was able to get across the sea to here, and it's brought so much peace. It's I can't even describe it really. That's all I can tell you. It brings shalom to the soul. It's like you actually did return home. You're where you're supposed to be. It's where the natural place that a Jewish soul really wants to be is in Israel. And at least that's how I feel. And I've talked to other people, and they've told me the same thing, that they have a lot of shalom by the fact they're being here. Even if there's difficulties, there's still this inner peace that you're in the right place. And that's really what I would have to say.
That's fabulous. Thank you very much for joining us, Ezra.
All right, thanks a lot, Meir. I appreciate
And I'll
it.
see you when I'm there this month.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I'll see you. Looking forward. Okay. Bye-bye.
Excellent.
Thank you, everybody.
Leon, final words.
Yeah, that was heartwarming, first of all, from Ezra. And by the way, my sister made Aliyah there years ago, and other people I know that have made Aliyah there. He's right. They all say the same thing. It might be they might fetch and whine a little bit here and there about the problems, like Ezra was talking about, the difficulties making Aliyah, the red tape, and the prices and the noise and the wars and everything. But the net is that's where the soul is supposed to go. And my mother, in lieu of a statement here, I'll end with this short little heartwarming story. My mother, the Holocaust survivor, who escaped Poland years ago, ended up in Toronto. She, in her later years, was at Baycrest. It's a famous nursing home down the street from me here in Toronto. And she always wanted to live in Israel. It just didn't happen. So what happens? She ends up contacting C. difficile, a nasty immune disease. Long story short, she was dying. So I had to make the call to my sister, who's Haredi, lives in Israel, Meita Aliyah, Baal Tshuva, amazing. Lots of children and grandchildren left Israel, came here to help see my mother. She ends up staying with us for a month, nurses my mother back to health, with Hashem's help, of course. The tube slowly came out of her nose and her mouth, and next thing you know, she still had the disease. She comes to me, my sister, she says, Leon, I'd like to take my mom back home to Israel with me. I think I could do a better job than Baycrest. So I said immediately, of course, you have my blessing. I was blessed looking after my parents all these years while they were in Toronto. And now, God willing, yeah, take her, please. Baycrest, obviously, I don't want to poke holes at Baycrest, but she was dying there. My sister sort of brought her back to life, and she wants to take her. Well, this is what I found out. It's hard to get into Baycrest. It's harder to get out of it. They didn't want to let her go because they thought my sister, they look at her, with the Haredi uniform, they thought she's nuts. What, are you going to take an 80-something-year-old sick lady on a plane over, with diapers? And what, are you nuts? And I said, okay, why don't you ask my mother what she wants? Now, my mother had lost her mind, thanks to the C. difficile. It killed her brain. She was very with it, and sad to say. So they actually came up with that idea. They said, well, why don't we ask her? I said, go ahead, ask her. She doesn't know what day of the week it is, but go ahead and ask her. Of course, she didn't know what they're talking about. Do you want to go to Israel? Okay. And so my sister did. We fought. She took her to Israel. She ended up living there for another, I think it was 4 years, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 6. She lived for another 6 years. The moral of the story is my mother was one of the few to leave Baycrest alive. And the reason she did it is because of what Ezra was talking about. The neshama needs to be there. And I know we all have our various reasons why we can't go there or can. I mean, I've lived in Israel at some point in my life. It was one of the best experiences of my life. And God, that's, look, Israel Now. That's the name of your website. Yes, that's what we're here for.
Well put. Fabulously put. Is Ryan here?
Nope, I think he checked out.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'll give some final words. So, I mean, listen, it's affecting the Jewish world, what is going on in the Ukraine. And what we have to do is our utmost to help the Jews from the Ukraine get to Israel and live there in Israel. And we have to get to Israel. And I'll be there shortly this month. I mean, it's fabulous. And, you know, what Leon says, you know, when he lived in Israel for whatever period of time. And I remember in my early 20s, I lived in Israel for a year, went to yeshiva there and had great friends in Israel. That was the best year ever of my life. And whenever I go back to Israel, I have the best time. I got great friends in Israel, and I love everything about Israel. And our show and our website, yes, is called Israel Now. And we have to attach ourselves with Israel. And we're living really in historic times. We are so privileged to live in this period of time. A little tiny Israel, and I emphasize it, it is 0.006 of the Middle East in size. And the anti-Semites want to take it from us. So we have to fight for it every single inch. And we have to beautify it. And it is beautiful. And Israel is incredibly beautiful and thriving and on the rise. And when you see the Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, that the world is counting on him to represent Israel and try to mediate some kind of a deal between Russia and the Ukraine to stop the possibility of World War III. What a change for the Jewish people from, you know, not so long ago, the Holocaust and the difficulty when Israel came into being in 1948, to where Israel is today and on the world stage. And it's got to be a proud Jewish state. And the more Jews who move there, the more proud it will be. And defeating the BDS lies and narrative and all that, you know, together we could do it. And we have to continuously speak the truth. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and we'll continue speaking the truth. We'll continue to have our shows, and when I am going to be in Israel, I'll be doing the show. We'll be doing the show from Israel, and we'll have the guests on as well. It will be amazing. You know, technology, that's exactly what we'll do, and it will be fabulous. And it's a pleasure to be with everyone always. So I'm sure that our doctor in the studio has some kind of a song that we're going to end with. And
Well, I had a different song actually, but all this talk about Aliyah, let me just make one comment before this.
oh, we can't hear you that well.
Can't hear you, Doc.
How's that? Is that better?
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, turning up the volume seems to help.
Yes.
So anyway, what I was going to say is I've heard that from many people making Aliyah, and I have many friends who made Aliyah. All three of our daughters have lived in Israel for, you know, periods of time from several months to a year. It's not easy. But then again, if it was easy, I mean, anyone can do it. It's a test in itself. Hashem is saying, you want to make Aliyah? Okay, make Aliyah. We want you to. But it's like when a non-Jew wants to become a Jew by choice. You can't just walk into a rabbi's office and say, I'm a Jew, and they say, poof, you're a Jew. You got to be denied. You got to go through. Same thing, in my opinion, regarding making Aliyah. No matter how difficult it may be, it's doable. So do it. And on that note, you know, like Nike says, just do it. Although Nike's a whole different story. But we'll leave that alone for another episode. But for now, let's play my favorite Let's Make Aliyah song.
הבאנו שלום, הבאנו שלום, הבאנו שלום עליכם.
Great show, Meir.
Excellent.
Gary.
We're
All right.
closing it down with Hatikva.
All right, guys, I'm going to run. Thanks for having me. Loved it.
Excellent, Leon.
קולות בלבב בנימה
נפש יהודי
הומייה
ותן מזרח קדימה
עין לציון צופיה עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו התקווה בשנות 2000 להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים
שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל